Good day, YouTubers. This is Captain Hal 1947 back again with one of my old guns. It's been a while since I've done any videos, but I had a request from a fellow by the name of Phil that I would do a video on the 151M that I have here, and so I said, well, yeah, sir, I'll do that for you. Anyway, he wanted a little bit more detailed description of this gun. This gun was made beginning in 1947 and was produced up until the mid-50s, at which time I think these particular Manicure style stocks kind of came out of favor. But before we got to this gun, we have to look back at the history of how this gun came about. In the mid-1930s, Mossberg decided they wanted to get into the semi-automatic rifle market, and they had never produced a semi-automatic, so they went and started to design it. It took about 3 years, and in about 1939, they came up with the 51M, which we have here. Now, Mossberg had never designed a semi-automatic, and this was their first foray into this particular market. They this gun has a safety thumb release over here. One of the problems with this gun, you cannot lock back the bolt. You can pull back the charging handle, and it just goes back into position. But it does have the safety back here, and this is not a very common weapon to see around. It is by collectors, it's known as a flatback because of the flat plug that you have here. Later weapons had a more cone shape, but it was their first try in this market, and they sold a bunch of them to Spiegel, who was one of the people that actually asked that they put in this Manicure style stock onto, which they did, and they found it become quite popular. They sold a lot to Spiegel and to Wards, and then later produced them under their own name. They're butt-fed, tubular magazine, or tubular feed, but they made this thing, some people say for maybe 9 months, and I've had other people say for a couple years. But in the meantime, they hired somebody that had a little bit more knowledge on designing automatic or semi-automatic rifles. And after about 2 years, because this weapon here had some major weaknesses in the mechanism. So after about 2 years, they came back with the 51M again. They used the same number. It looks somewhat like the same gun, except the mechanism in here is completely different. The bolt, the firing mechanism is completely different. One of the ways you can tell this is a different gun is because it does have this cone-shaped butt end here. Both of them are butt-fed, tubular butt-fed. They both hold 15 rounds of a 22 long rifle, and you have to use 22 long rifle on all these guns because they're basically a blowback system, and they need that to have the power to make it operate correctly. But it was different in as much as it didn't have the safety, but it does have a thumb safety, but it does have a safety here. So you can lock back the bolt by pulling it all the way back here and pushing it in. So that was good. But the one bad thing about it is once you've charged it, boom, you have no way of having a safety. You're hot and you have to be ready to shoot. So you have to be a little bit aware of that. You can pull it back and put it in that safety right there. But some people don't. But anyway, they produced this gun up through the war, up to about 1947. I don't know how many they produced because at that time, they had some major military contracts. They were making the 42 MB for the British military as a training rifle, and then they later on started producing the 44 US for the United States military as a training rifle. They were also making some parts for the 50 caliber. So they had some major war contracts, and I would think a lot of their time was probably used in fulfilling those contracts. But anyway, after the war, they redesigned the gun, and they came up with the now known as the 151. Now the 151, again, looks somewhat similar, has a charging handle, has the same locking mechanism for safety, can be locked all the way back, has a torpedo or tubular chrome-shaped end here. They all had similar sights. They all had a peep sight, an open sight here, and the front sights here were the 4 aperture sights that Mossberg had, which was kind of unique to them. But one of the major changes was they had cut a groove in here and had gotten rid of having to drill and tap on the backside so that you could mount a scope more easily. These both can have scopes mounted to them, but you have to put a rail mounted on the side, on the back side here, and then you can mount your scope. But this gun has completely changed inner workings, and it is a much stronger weapon. It has no problems with jamming or anything along that lines. If there is a jam, it's usually because the shooter might have done something wrong. But it also is tubular fed. It holds 15 rounds, long rifle. They eventually changed and went over to the plastic butt plate. They all three have the notable finger grooved plastic trigger guards, which is synonymous with Mossberg. And this gun, as fast as you can pull the trigger, it shoots. So, and this gun was made up into back to mid-1950s, in which time the manicure style stock, I think, kind of went out of favor, and they went to a more regular traditional stock that you see in most rifles today. But they also were making, at the time they were making this, in the 1950s, they came up with the 151K, which is basically the same rifle, but it doesn't have the 4-stock. But this mechanism was a really good mechanism. It worked well, and it was used on a number of other weapons. They had a 152 and a 152K, which basically had the same bolt action, but instead of being fed from the butt, it was clip fed down here. So the feeding mechanism would have been a little bit different. And that was made up for a number of years. And then in the late 50s, they came back with some new style weapons, which are the 351 and 351K. They were tube fed. They were carbine style, so they had a shorter barrel, but they had a fold down front stock, and they were made up into the late 60s. They also made a 352 and 352K, which again was a shorter carbine style weapon with a fold down stock, but it had a clip fed instead of the tubular fed. And they were made for a couple of years in the late 50s, and then they stopped making that particular gun. But this particular mechanism here on the bolt and firing mechanism is similar on all the later weapons, and it was really a good mechanism, held up well, very little feeding problems, and so the overall, this particular mechanism was the best that they had come up with, and it took a lot of years of designing and before they actually came up with this one. And when you shoot all three, this one you will have very little or no problems with. The others, you get some jams and particularly this one here, and there's a weakness in the feeding mechanism, which has a tendency to wear out quickly. And that one, that was one of the problems with that particular gun. But all these guns have the same length barrel. They all weigh about the same, and they all have approximately the same types of sights on them. Front sights, the open rear sights, they changed over the years, and then the rear peep sights, which they changed over the years. This having a number 4. This one here had a number 100. And this one, if it had it on there, would have probably a 130. So they do change some of the mechanisms on this, but overall they look the same. And just to the average person who does not know anything about these particular guns, they may look the same to them, but they aren't, and they're definitely not when you go inside into them. Now, I'm not taking these guns apart because it's not what I like to do, but there are some other videos, I think on a 151K, where the guy does do a disassembling of the particular weapon. And so if you're interested in how they're disassembled and what the mechanism looks like inside, find that particular video, and it'll explain to you. It's the same as this one, it's just the stock's different. That's basically the only difference. So anyway, I hope I've answered some of your questions. If not, please write me, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If I've not made something clear, or if you've got any other questions, please let me know, or any other requests. So anyway, this is Captain Hal signing off. You'll have a good day.